Yeah, this strategy has really landed like a ton of bricks here in Brussels, particularly on the question of Ukraine, because the way people are reading it here is this is the US saying that Europe is an enemy and Russia is a friend. Specifically, the document says that European governments have, quote, unrealistic expectations about the war. In other words, European governments still think Ukraine can win the war, and the United States now believes that the only outcome here is that Russia wins the war. The document went on to suggest that the elitist governments of Europe aren't listening to the people, that the majority of Europeans want Ukraine to accept that 28-point peace plan, a peace plan that most here in Brussels view as terms of surrender for Ukraine. And it was really scathing about the sitting governments of Europe, but really had only nice things or neutral things to say about Russia. In fact, the document mentions Europe 50 times, more than any other area of the world. China, for instance, is only mentioned 23 times. So this has really rattled people here. I think it's not that different, actually, from a statement that came out from the State Department back in May, talking about this civilizational conflict and centrist governments not being very good. But people really have not wanted to hear what the U.S. is saying. It is hard to ignore, however, when it is in a national security strategy.
And tell us more, Dave, about the kinds of reactions that this doctrine has sparked in Europe.
Yeah, people behind the scenes, let's say journalists, think tank people, are absolutely apoplectic about this. It's really, really shocked people here. Like I say, a lot of people have not really wanted to engage or listen to some of the really scary things that the Trump administration has been saying about Europe. Now they have no choice. But, however, the leaders of Europe have been pretty quiet about this, the same way they have been this entire year whenever the Trump administration says these types of things about Europe. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has been completely silent. The Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk yesterday put a statement on X asking if the transatlantic alliance had changed. Seems like it has, I think. But it was a very, very lackluster response from all European leaders. We did, however, today have a statement from Antonio Costa. He was speaking at a think tank event in Paris, and he was asked about the new national security strategy. He said it would be unacceptable for the United States to be interfering in the politics of Europe, and that it is for European citizens to decide who are the good parties and who are the bad parties in elections. And he's, of course, referring to the fact that the national security strategy is identifying for support what they call patriotic parties, what are really far-right nationalist parties in Europe that are challenging the sitting centrist governments. That his message there is that it's unacceptable for the U.S. to be kind of pursuing regime change by supporting these far-right opposition parties and trying to hurt the sitting centrist parties. Nevertheless, we still didn't get a whole lot of reaction yet publicly. Behind the scenes, though, this has really, really rattled Europeans.
All right, Dave Keating, thank you very much for that update from Brussels. It's time now for Truth or Fake. Vedika Bahel joins me on set. Hi, Vedika.
Hi, Karis.
Vedika, European digital transparency rules have become a flashpoint between Brussels and US big tech companies backed by Donald Trump's administration. Today, the European Commission has completely dismissed what it called completely crazy statements by Elon Musk. What did he say?
Well, yes, that is correct, Karis. X's Elon Musk has posted a slew of online attacks against the EU after the European Commission imposed a €120 million fine on X for breaching its transparency obligations. Now, in what I can only describe to you as an online frenzy, Musk posted and reposted a series of memes and jabs and satire. We can see a couple of examples of that here about his anger against the EU's decision. But he did take this as far as to compare the European Union to Nazi Germany. Now, he also made posts calling to dissolve the European Union entirely. He said here that the EU should be abolished and sovereignty returned to individual countries so governments can better represent their people. He followed this up by saying, "I love Europe, but not the bureaucratic monster that is the EU." Now, this constant posting and these constant jabs, I'm talking hundreds of tweets here, well, this led to a response from the bloc itself, which said it's part of freedom of speech to put out even completely crazy statements. So the bloc hasn't minced its words there, Karis, about how it sees Elon Musk's behaviour.
And Vedika, what is the reason for this €120 million fine against Musk's platform?
Well, according to the European Commission on Friday, it is for non-compliance with the bloc's transparency rules. Now, as a very large platform, X has obligations under the DSA, that is the European Union's Digital Service Act. It is the bloc's flagship law in order to regulate online platforms. Now, the EU said that X's blue checkmark had a deceptive design. It also called out lack of transparency of its advertising repository, saying that the app fails to provide transparency around its ads, and that it doesn't give its public data to researchers overall. So let's take a listen exactly to what the EU had to say.
X has indeed breached its transparency obligation under the DSA. This includes X's blue checkmark. It deceives users. Anyone can pay to obtain the verified status, and X does not meaningfully verify who is behind it. It also includes X advertising repository, which does not work properly, and X doesn't provide effective data access for researchers. Today's decision has nothing to do with content moderation. It's about transparency.
And about transparency, sorry, we got cut off at the end there. But as we heard, the EU finds that the blue tick deceives users. That is because they believe it makes it difficult to judge about the authenticity of the accounts, as anyone can pay to obtain that verified status. And I can validate that, especially here on Truth or Fake, our fact-checking show. It is very difficult to check those accounts and who is behind those, especially we're seeing a rise in misinformation and fake news pertaining to those accounts, particularly because people believe that the verified checkmark believes that it is a qualified verified account rather than a journalist or a news organisation or government officials. Now the EU also said in its press interest, in its press release, this is a bit more detail about it. But regarding the ad repository, it says that X lacks critical information like the content and topic of the ad, and especially the legal entity who is paying for it. And lastly, as we heard there, they have issue with the platform's public data and lack of providing it to the EU, which they believe, Karis, is undermining research into several systemic risks in the European Union.
All right, and finally, Vedika, the EU's decision has also triggered a reaction from Washington, hasn't it?
That is correct. Well, we did hear briefly in that EU soundbite that they clarified that this wasn't about moderating the app or censorship, but in fact for transparency regarding X. But hasn't stopped top Washington officials from wading in to blast this decision. Just before the European Commission made that announcement about that fine, Vice President J.D. Vance slammed the EU, saying it should be supporting free speech, not attacking American companies over garbage. There's another reaction here by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who said it isn't just an attack on X, but on all American tech platforms and the American people by foreign governments. I also have a reaction here by the US ambassador to the EU, who says that it is, in fact, a result of EU regulatory overreach. Now, what happens next? Well, X now has 60 days to inform the Commission of its plans to address the issue surrounding those blue check marks. And in terms of submitting its plans for the ad repository and public data, it has 90 working days to do so and submit what it's going to do about that. Whether Musk pays up, Karis, we will just have to wait and see.
All right, indeed, Vedika Pahel, thank you very much for helping us see a little clearer on that.